The alarm screamed through the cold darkness of space. Captain Kim Dae jerked awake in his chair at the monitoring station, coffee spilling across his desk. For 30 years, he had watched the empty void beyond Earth's borders, waiting for something that might never come. Tonight, that something had arrived. The red emergency lights bathed his weathered face in crimson shadows. Kim Dae had been stationed at Outpost 7 since he was 25, back when humanity still believed they might find friends among the stars. Now, at 55, his hair was gray, and his hope had long since died. But the signal cutting through the static made his heart race like a young man's. "Computer, clean up this transmission," he ordered, his voice hoarse from years of talking to machines instead of people. The crackling noise faded, revealing a voice speaking in clicks and whistles. The universal translator worked slowly, processing each alien word with mechanical precision. Kim Dae had heard this language before, during the dark days when humanity first reached for the stars. "This is Ambassador Veltar of the Kaleri Federation." The voice came through, broken and desperate. The translator made it sound robotic, but Kim Dae could hear the fear underneath. We need your help. The Harbinger swarm has awakened. Our fleets are gone. Please. Kim Dae leaned forward, his knuckles white as he gripped the console. The Kaleri Federation. He remembered them well. They were among the first to call humans to violence when Earth applied to join the Galactic Council 40 years ago. They had voted to keep humanity locked in their own solar system, calling them dangerous Deathworlders who would corrupt galactic peace. "We know we rejected you before," the ambassador continued, and Kim Dae could almost hear the alien swallowing its pride. "But only the Deathworlders can stop this. Only you can save us." The transmission cut to static, leaving Kim Dae alone with the humming of machines and the weight of history. He stared at the communication array, his finger hovering over the emergency channel to Earth Command. 30 years of isolation. 30 years of being called monsters and savages by species who claimed to be more civilized. And now they came begging. Kim Dae thought about his son back on Earth, who had never seen an alien face except in old news broadcasts. He thought about the human colonies that had been forced to develop in secret, hidden from galactic eyes. He thought about all the times Earth had offered help to distant worlds, only to be turned away with disgust. But he also thought about the fear in that alien voice. Whatever this Harbinger swarm was, it had broken an entire federation of advanced species. If they were desperate enough to contact the humans they despised, then something truly terrible was happening out there in the dark. His weathered hand moved to the communication panel. The message would reach Earth Command in 6 hours. By tomorrow, every human leader would know that the galaxy that had rejected them was now pleading for salvation. Kim Dae wondered what they would decide. Would humanity answer the call of those who had once spurned them, or would they let the galaxy burn? He pressed the transmission button and leaned back in his chair, staring out at the stars that had once seemed so welcoming but had proven so cold. Somewhere out there, entire worlds were dying, and only the Deathworlders of Earth might be able to stop it. The war room deep beneath Earth Command buzzed with tension as Admiral Park Soo-jin stared at the holographic files floating before her. Each document told the same painful story, humanity's desperate attempt to join the galactic community, only to be slapped down like children reaching for adult conversation. She touched the first file, and video footage filled the air. A younger version of herself stood proudly beside Earth's first ambassador as they presented humanity's application to the Galactic Council 40 years ago. The hope in their eyes made her stomach turn now. They had been so naive, so eager to prove that humans belonged among the stars. "Look at this garbage," General Lee Minho growled from across the table, his scarred hands damaged in the mining accidents that had built humanity's first space colonies clenched into tight fists. The old soldier had never forgotten the humiliation. "They called us barbarians, said we were too violent, too unpredictable for civilized space. Park Soo-jin nodded, remembering every cruel word. The Kaleri representative had stood up during the hearing, his translator rendering his species' musical language into cold human words. These creatures solve disputes with violence. They wage war against their own kind. They are evolutionarily flawed, unfit for peaceful coexistence. Other council members had agreed quickly. The Zephyrians worried about human aggressive tendencies. The Crystalline Collective feared human emotional instability. One by one, every advanced species in the galaxy had voted to keep humanity locked in their own solar system, like dangerous animals in a cage. Remember what the Vorthan ambassador said? Lee Minho spat. That humans were a mistake evolution should have corrected. That we belonged in isolation until we learned to be civilized. The rejection had crushed humanity's dreams of galactic citizenship. Worse, the Council had imposed strict limits on human space travel. No human ship could venture beyond the outer planets of their own system. No human colony could be established on worlds beyond their sun's reach. Earth was to remain quarantined until they evolved past their violent nature. The door hissed open, and Dr. Choi Hai-jin rushed in, her tablet clutched against her chest. Her usually calm face was pale with shock. "Admiral, you need to see the preliminary reports from the refugees who made it to our border stations." She swiped her tablet, sending the data to the main display. Images of devastation filled the room, entire planets stripped bare, their surfaces glowing like molten metal. Ships the size of cities drifted as empty hulks. Their crews vanished without a trace. "The first wave of refugees arrived 6 hours ago," Dr. Choi explained, her voice shaking. "They're calling it the Harbinger Swarm. Ancient machines that consume everything in their path. Entire star systems are being devoured in hours, not days or weeks." Park Soo-jin studied the footage of fleeing alien ships, many barely holding together with emergency patches. These were the same species that had once looked down on humanity with disgust, calling them savage Deathworlders. Now, they fled in terror, their advanced technology useless against this new threat. "The irony is thick enough to cut with a knife," Lee Minho said bitterly. 40 years of being told we're too violent for their perfect galaxy. Now they come running to the violent Deathworlders when something really dangerous shows up. Dr. Choi pulled up casualty reports. "If these numbers are accurate, we're looking at the potential extinction of galactic civilization. The Council's combined fleets have been completely destroyed. They're not just asking for our help, they're begging for it." Park Soo-jin closed her eyes, feeling the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. The same aliens who had rejected humanity as monsters now pleaded for salvation from the very monsters they had created through isolation and shame. The emergency session in the presidential bunker lasted only 20 minutes. President Yoon Jae-won sat at the head of the polished table, surrounded by humanity's top military leaders and advisors. The debate had been fierce but brief. Some argued that humanity owed nothing to the species that had rejected them. Others insisted that innocent lives hung in the balance. President Yoon stood slowly, his weathered face reflecting years of carrying humanity's burdens. "We are not them," he said quietly. "We will not abandon the innocent because their leaders once abandoned us." He turned to Admiral Park Soo-jin, his voice growing stronger. "Operation Redemption is authorized. We go not for those who rejected us, but for the innocent who suffer." Within hours, his words echoed through every military installation across Earth and its hidden colonies. From the shipyards of Luna to the training facilities on Mars. From the secret bases in the asteroid belt to the research stations near Jupiter. Humanity began to mobilize for a war they had prepared for, but never expected to fight. Admiral Park Soo-jin walked through the command center of Earth's largest orbital station, her boots clicking against the metal floors that had been polished by decades of military discipline. Around her, the Terran Defense Fleet's most experienced commanders, gathered men and women who had spent their entire careers preparing for battles that might never come. Captain Oh Sung-min arrived first, his massive frame filling the doorway. The veteran commander of the battleship Defiance had served 30 years without firing a shot in anger. But everyone knew he was ready. His ship and crew had run countless simulations, practiced every possible combat scenario that human strategists could imagine. Commander Nam Soo-jin followed, her carrier Revenge trailing behind her flagship like a protective mother with her deadly children. Her fighter pilots were the best humanity had ever produced, trained in secret facilities where they practiced maneuvers that pushed both man and machine to their absolute limits. One by one, dozens of other officers filled the briefing room. Captain Kang Tae-an of the Destroyer Squadron, known for his ability to navigate impossible terrain. Major Han De-ji, whose Marines could board and capture enemy vessels in conditions that would kill most soldiers. Colonel Lim Jun-ho, whose Special Forces teams specialized in the kind of desperate missions that regular troops couldn't handle. These were humanity's finest warriors, forged in isolation and tempered by decades of knowing they stood alone against a hostile galaxy. Now, finally, they would have their chance to prove what Deathworlders could really do. As the massive fleet prepared for departure, something unexpected began happening in the outer reaches of the Sol system. Battered alien ships limped through the defense perimeter, their hulls scarred and patched with whatever materials their crews could find. These weren't invasion forces or diplomatic missions. These were refugees, fleeing something so terrible that even their advanced technology couldn't protect them. Lieutenant Yu Do-hai worked around the clock in the translation center, her team struggling to process the flood of desperate testimonies from survivors. Each alien that was brought aboard human rescue ships told the same horrifying story, but in different words, different languages, different ways of expressing absolute terror. They came without warning, one Kaleri survivor whispered, his translator struggling with words that had no human equivalent. Great geometric shapes that blotted out our sun. We fired everything we had, but our weapons just disappeared into them. Another refugee, from a species humans had never seen before, described, watching her homeworld die, it didn't explode. It just melted. The whole planet turned into liquid metal, then got sucked up into those horrible machines. The accounts painted a picture of an enemy unlike anything in galactic history. The Harbinger swarm didn't just destroy civilizations. It consumed them completely, breaking down matter at the atomic level and rebuilding it into more of itself. Entire star systems vanished in hours, their populations, planets, and even their suns converted into raw materials for an endless hunger that could never be satisfied. The jump from hyperspace always made Captain Oh Sung-min's stomach lurch. But what he saw when the stars stopped spinning made him forget all about motion sickness. The Zarian system, once home to 12 billion Kaleri civilians, had become a vision of hell painted across the cosmos. Massive geometric shapes floated where planets used to be. Each one was the size of Earth's moon, their surfaces covered in patterns that hurt to look at directly. They moved with purpose, extending mechanical arms that could have wrapped around entire continents. As Oh Sung-min watched in horror, one of these giants reached toward what remained of Zarian Prime and began peeling away layers of rock and metal, like someone opening a can of food. "My God," whispered Lieutenant Park Ji-won from the navigation station. "They're eating the planets." It was true. The massive machines weren't just destroying worlds. They were consuming them completely. The planet's surface glowed white-hot as it was broken down into its basic elements, then sucked up into the geometric holes like soup through a straw. What had taken billions of years to form was being undone in hours. But the big machines weren't the only threat. Between them swarmed clouds of smaller vessels, each about the size of a human fighter, but moving in perfect coordination. They hunted the fleeing civilian transports like wolves chasing sheep. their weapons turning escape pods into brief flashes of light. Captain Oh Sung-min had spent 30 years studying galactic military technology, preparing for a war against enemies who considered humans primitive savages. The Kolari dreadnought that appeared on his main screen at once represented everything he feared about facing advanced alien weapons. It was 3 kilometers long, armed with plasma cannons that could melt asteroids, protected by shields that could deflect nuclear warheads. He watched it die in 15 seconds. The swarm units hit it from every angle, their weapons passing through the mighty shields like they weren't even there. The great ship's armor, forged from metals unknown to human science, simply dissolved under the alien assault. In moments, the pride of the Kolari fleet became nothing more than glowing debris scattered across space. Admiral Commander Shin, Biara called from the tactical station, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. I'm getting sensor readings on these things, but the numbers don't make sense. Admiral Park Soo-jin moved to stand behind her, studying the data streaming across multiple screens. Give me your assessment, Commander. Shin Bior's face had gone pale, making her look younger than her 40 years. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours, maybe more. The energy readings from those big ships would power all of Earth for 1,000 years. But Admiral ... She paused, her fingers dancing across the controls as she analyzed attack patterns. But what, Commander? They're predictable. Every move they make follows perfect mathematical patterns. They attack based on efficiency calculations, position themselves for maximum resource extraction, respond to threats in order of tactical priority. Shin Barar looked up at her admiral with something like hope in her eyes. They're machines, Admiral. They think like machines. This was both terrifying and encouraging. Machines could process information faster than any biological brain, could coordinate attacks with perfect precision, could optimize their strategies beyond what living creatures could imagine. But machines also followed rules, operated on logic, made decisions based on programming that never changed. In the distance, the remnants of the Galactic Council's combined fleet limped away from the battle zone. Ships that had once inspired fear across the galaxy now fled in panic, their formations shattered, their crews broken by facing an enemy they couldn't understand or fight. Admiral Park Soo-jin watched alien vessels she recognized from intelligence briefings, Zephyrian cruisers, Vorthan destroyers, crystalline collective support ships, all running for their lives from an enemy that treated them like annoying insects. She opened the communication channel, broadcasting on all frequencies that fleeing aliens might be monitoring. This is Admiral Park Soo-jin of the Terran Defense Fleet. We're here to help. The response came immediately, filled with static and desperation. Human ships, this is impossible. You cannot be here. The quarantine. The alien voice broke off, as explosions lit up the darkness nearby. The quarantine is over, Admiral Park replied simply. We're here to fight. Captain Kang Taeyeon stared at the dense asteroid field on his tactical display, watching rocks the size of skyscrapers tumble through space in chaotic patterns. His destroyer squadron waited behind him, their crews watching their captain with the kind of trust that came from years of impossible training missions. Sir, his navigation officer called out nervously. The computer shows a 89.7% chance of collision if we attempt passage through that field. The gaps between asteroids are constantly shifting. Kang Tae-hyun smiled, the same expression he'd worn during countless simulations where he'd been told something couldn't be done. That's exactly why we're going through it. The machines think it's impossible, so they won't expect us there. The Harbinger swarm had positioned itself with mathematical precision, every unit placed for maximum efficiency. Their formation was perfect for fighting civilized enemies who attacked in logical patterns and avoided unnecessary risks. But humans weren't civilized, and they certainly weren't logical. All ships, follow my lead, Kang Tae-han announced. Remember your asteroid. Field training. Trust your instincts. not your computers. The 6 destroyers plunged into the chaotic maze of spinning rocks, their hulls coming within meters of catastrophic impacts, dozens of times. Human pilots relied on split-second reflexes and intuition, making course corrections that no computer could calculate fast enough. Behind them, swarm units tried to follow, but smashed into asteroids they couldn't predict or avoid. On the bridge of the Defiance, the Kaleri liaison officer watched the human maneuver with undisguised amazement. His translator rendered his musical language into flat human words. No logical species would attempt such a maneuver. Your own computers calculated a 89.7% probability of collision. Captain Oh Sung-min chuckled as he watched Kong Tae's squadron emerge from the asteroid field directly behind a major swarm hub, their weapons already firing. That's the difference between us and them. We don't let math tell us what's impossible. The surprise attack worked perfectly. The swarm hub, a geometric nightmare the size of a city, had focused all its defenses toward the expected attack vectors. It never saw the human destroyers coming from behind, until their missiles were already tearing through its structure. But the real shock came when Commander Nam Soo-jin's fighter squadrons engaged the swarm's smaller units. Human pilots flew patterns that made alien observers sick just watching them corkscrewing through enemy formations, pulling gravitational forces that should have killed them, using the debris from destroyed swarm units as cover and weapons. "Watch this," Nam Soo-jin said over the comm as her fighter dove between 2 swarm units. Using their own crossfire to destroy each other, they calculate the most efficient way to hit targets, but they can't adapt fast enough when we make ourselves unpredictable. Her pilots followed her lead, performing maneuvers that violated every rule of civilized space combat. They flew through explosions, used enemy ships as launching pads, and somehow managed to avoid destruction through sheer audacity and skill that no amount of programming could match. The most shocking human tactic came when Major Han, the G, led her Marines in boarding actions against damaged swarm vessels. While other species tried to fight the machines at a distance, humans got up close and personal. "Breach in 3 seconds," Han Dagi announced as her assault pod slammed into a swarm ship's hull. The explosive charges detonated, creating a hole that would have killed most species through instant decompression. But human Marines wore suits designed for exactly this kind of insanity. Inside the alien vessel, her soldiers fought with weapons and techniques that no civilized military would consider. They used zero-gravity combat skills developed in Earth's asteroid mines, turning the ship's own corridors into weapons. When ammunition ran low, they fought with knives, tools, and their bare hands in conditions that would terrify most species. Priority. Target secured, Han Vijay reported as her team destroyed the ship's central processing unit. Moving to next objective. The machines tried to adapt, updating their algorithms to account for human unpredictability. But every time they thought they had figured out human tactics, the humans would do something even more impossible. They evolved their strategies faster than artificial intelligence could calculate, staying one step ahead through pure creativity and stubborn refusal to accept limitations. Back on the Defiance, Commander Shinbora watched the tactical display with growing excitement. "Admiral, their formation is breaking down. They can't maintain coordination when they can't predict our moves." "Admiral Park," Soo-jin nodded grimly as she watched her people fight with the kind of desperate courage that had once made aliens call them Deathworlders. "That's why they rejected us. We don't fight by their rules, we make our own." Captain Beak, G1 watched her bridge crew with pride as the swarm units closed in around the destroyer Indomitable. The ship shook violently under enemy fire, sparks flying from damaged consoles, but not one of her officers had left their posts. These were humans who had trained their entire lives for a moment like this, and they would not break now. "Shield generators are offline, Captain," her tactical officer reported, his voice steady, despite the blood running down his face from a head wound. Hull breaches, on decks 7 through 12, were losing atmosphere fast. Through the viewscreen, Beak G1 could see the colony transport Gentle Dawn limping away from the battle. The massive civilian ship carried 10,000 Kaleri refugees, families with children, elderly beings who had lived through centuries of peace, young adults who had never known war. They were helpless against the swarm units that hunted them, like predators chasing wounded prey. "Engineering, how much power do we have left in the fusion reactor?" she asked, already knowing what she had to do. 90% capacity, Captain, but the containment systems are failing if we push it any harder." "That's exactly what I'm counting on," Beak G1 said quietly. She opened the ship-wide communication channel, her voice carrying to every corner of the dying vessel. "All hands, this is your captain. We have one last job to do." Her crew knew what she meant without explanation. They had all seen the tactical situation, understood that the Gentle Dawn would never escape the swarm units on its own. The only way to save those 10,000 innocent lives was to sacrifice their own. "Communications, open a channel to Fleet." "Command," she ordered. The young officer at the comm station nodded, tears streaming down his face as he established the connection. "This is Captain Beak G1 of the destroyer, Indomitable," she said, her voice carrying across the battle zone. "To every human ship, tell my family I died protecting the innocent. Tell them I'm proud to be human." She paused, looking at her crew one last time. "All hands, prepare for ramming speed." The Indomitable's engines roared to life, pushing the damaged ship far beyond its safety limits. The vessel accelerated toward the heart of the swarm formation, its hull glowing red-hot from the strain. Enemy weapons hammered against its armor, but nothing could stop a ship whose crew had already accepted death. The fusion reactor detonated in a burst of light that could be seen across the entire system. The explosion tore through the swarm formation, like a fist through paper, destroying dozens of enemy units and clearing a path for the refugee transport to escape. Where the Indomitable had been, only expanding plasma and twisted metal remained on the bridge of the Gentle Dawn. Kaleri civilians watched in stunned silence as the human ship died to save them. These were the same aliens who had once called humans monsters, who had voted to keep them quarantined like dangerous animals. Now they witnessed humans dying for people who had rejected them, asking for nothing in return. Lieutenant Udahai sat at her communication station aboard the flagship, monitoring alien channels across the refugee fleet. Her translation equipment worked constantly, processing hundreds of conversations in dozens of languages as word of the human sacrifice spread through the surviving ships. "Admiral," she called to Park Soo-jin, her voice thick with emotion. "You need to hear this. They're calling us heroes. The aliens ... they can't believe what they're seeing." She routed the translated conversations to the bridge speakers. Alien voices filled the air, speaking in wonder and shame about the humans who fought for strangers. A Zephyrian commander admitted that his species had been wrong about human nature. A crystalline collective elder wept as she described the sacrifice, saying no civilized species would have made such a choice. "The word is spreading through all the refugee fleets," Udahai continued. "They're saying the Deathworlders fight not for glory or conquest, but for those who cannot protect themselves." Admiral Park Soo-jin closed her eyes as the casualty reports came in. 3 destroyers completely destroyed, 2 cruisers so badly damaged they could barely maintain life support. Over 800 of her people were dead, with hundreds more wounded. These were sons and daughters, fathers and mothers, young people who would never return home to Earth. But the tactical display told another story. For every human life lost, thousands of alien civilians had escaped the swarm. Colony transports that would have been destroyed now limped toward safety. Hospital ships full of wounded refugees continued their journey to secure systems. Medical Evacuation vessels carrying alien children flew under the protection of human escorts. Commander Shinbora approached the Admiral's chair, her own face showing the strain of hours of continuous battle. Admiral, we're receiving gratitude messages from over 40 different species. Many of them had never heard of humans before today. Park Soo-jin nodded slowly, watching as another human destroyer moved to intercept swarm units, chasing a group of alien escape pods. Her people were writing a new chapter in galactic history with their blood, proving that the species once called savage Deathworlders understood honor better than those who claimed to be civilized. Admiral Park Soo-jin had been staring at the tactical display for 3 hours straight, her eyes bloodshot from analyzing enemy movement patterns. Coffee cups piled up around her workstation as she searched for something. Anything that could give humanity an edge against an enemy that seemed unbeatable. The Harbinger swarm moved with perfect precision across the battlefield. Every ship positioned for maximum efficiency. Every weapon fired at optimal timing. Every defensive formation calculated to minimize losses while maximizing damage. It was like watching a computer simulation of the perfect military force, and that's when it hit her. "They're too perfect," she whispered, causing Commander Shinbora to look up from her own analysis station. "Admiral," Park Soo-jin stood up suddenly, her chair rolling backward as pieces of the puzzle clicked together in her mind. "Look at their patterns, Commander. Every single move they make has to justify itself mathematically. They can't waste resources, can't make inefficient choices, can't act without logical purpose." She pointed to the holographic battlefield where swarm units moved in geometric formations. "They can't comprehend irrational behavior. Every move must have strategic value in their calculations. But what if we made moves that made no tactical sense at all?" Commander Shinbora's eyes widened as she understood. "If we attack targets with no strategic value, use tactics that waste resources, make sacrifices that don't advance our position, ... The AI wouldn't know how to respond," Park Soo-jin finished. "It would try to find the logical purpose behind our actions. Tie up processing power, trying to understand moves that have no mathematical justification." Working together, they began crafting the most insane battle plan in military history. Multiple simultaneous strikes on targets that served no tactical purpose. Ships sacrificing themselves to destroy meaningless enemy positions. Coordinated attacks that would accomplish nothing except confusing an artificial intelligence that demanded logical explanations for everything. Word of the plan spread through the human fleet within minutes. The communication channels buzzed with quiet discussions as ship captains explained to their crews what would be required. This wasn't just dangerous, it was guaranteed suicide for many of the ships involved. Captain Oh Sung-min was the first to volunteer. He walked onto the bridge of the Defiance, his weathered face showing no fear as he addressed his crew. "I've just reviewed Admiral Park's battle plan. It calls for several ships to make final runs against targets that serve no strategic purpose except to confuse the enemy's artificial intelligence." The bridge crew exchanged glances, understanding immediately what their captain was asking. Lieutenant Park Ji-won, barely 25 years old, was the first to speak up. "The Defiance will take point, sir." "That's not your decision to make," Lieutenant Oh Sung-min said gently. "With respect, Captain, yes it is. We all volunteered for this mission, knowing we might not come home. If our death can save innocent lives, then we've done our job." Similar conversations were happening across the fleet. Commander Nam Soo-jin stood before her carrier's senior staff, explaining that the Revenge would need to launch a fighter attack against a target that had no military value whatsoever. Her pilots would die for the sole purpose of making the enemy waste computational resources trying to understand their motives. "The plan calls for us to attack a swarm processing node that handles asteroid mining operations," she explained. "Destroying it won't hurt their military capabilities at all. but the AI will spend precious microseconds trying to figure out why we considered it worth dying for. Her squadron leaders nodded grimly. These were men and women who had trained for decades in secret facilities, practicing maneuvers that pushed human reflexes to their absolute limits. They had always known this day might come. Across the fleet, similar scenes played out on dozens of ships. Crews who had spent years together, who had become families in the isolation of space, now faced the reality that many of them would not survive the next few hours. But not one ship requested to be removed from the mission roster. Captain Kong Taehyun gathered his destroyer squadron commanders for a final briefing. According to the plan, we'll be making attack runs on targets that the AI considers completely worthless. Supply depots, communication relays, even empty space where we'll pretend to attack phantom enemies. It's brilliant, said Captain Lee, Dongwu of the destroyer, relentless. The machines can't understand why anyone would die for nothing. They'll tie themselves in knots trying to find logic where none exists. Young Lieutenant Han Min-kyung, serving as communications officer on the flagship, listened to the volunteer reports streaming in from across the fleet. Ship after ship requested permission to join the final assault, their crews ready to sacrifice everything for a plan that made no tactical sense at all. Admiral, she reported, her voice cracking with emotion, every single ship in the fleet has volunteered for the final strike. They all want to be part of this. Park Soo-jin nodded slowly, feeling the weight of command heavier than ever before. In a few hours, many of these brave souls would be dead, having died for the most illogical reason in military history to confuse an enemy computer with their own meaningless sacrifice. The bridge of the flagship fell silent as Admiral Park Soo-jin checked her chronometer one last time. 559 hours, ship time. In 60 seconds, the most desperate gambit in human history would begin. Around her, the command crew sat at their stations with the quiet dignity of people who knew they were about to witness something terrible and magnificent. All ships report ready, Admiral, Lieutenant Han Min-kyung announced, her voice steady. Despite the tears she was trying to hide, Park Soo-jin opened the fleet-wide channel. This is Admiral Park to all vessels. In 30 seconds, we begin Operation Final Gambit. Remember, we're not fighting for victory today. We're fighting to confuse an enemy that thinks it understands everything. Make your sacrifices count. At exactly 0600 hours, the human fleet exploded into motion. Captain Oh Sung-min guided the Defiance toward a swarm hub that served no tactical purpose whatsoever, a massive structure that only processed raw materials from destroyed asteroids. His crew worked with calm efficiency as enemy fire hammered their shields, knowing that their death would serve the strangest military objective in galactic history. Ramming speed achieved. Captain, his helmsman reported. Reactor overload in 10 seconds. It's been an honor serving with you all, Oh Sung-min said, as his ship plowed into the geometric nightmare. The explosion lit up space like a new star being born, and the AI somewhere in the swarm network frantically tried to calculate why humans would die to destroy something so meaningless. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out. Human ships charged into positions that made no tactical sense, attacking targets that offered no strategic advantage, sacrificing themselves in patterns that violated every rule of military logic. Each death confused the Harbinger's artificial intelligence a little more, forcing it to waste processing power trying to understand the incomprehensible. But the real key to the plan was happening inside the central Harbinger node itself. Colonel Lim Jun-ho and his special forces team had managed to board the massive command structure during the chaos of the seemingly random attacks. Now they fought their way through corridors that pulsed with alien energy, facing mechanical defenders that moved like living nightmares made of metal and death. Contact left, shouted Corporal Bang Hyeonwoo, as spider-like machines skittered along the walls, their weapons spinning up to fire. Human Marines dove for cover behind twisted alien architecture, returning fire with weapons that barely scratched the enemy's advanced armor. Plasma charges, now, Lim Junho ordered. His soldiers threw their most powerful explosives, clearing a path through the mechanical swarm at the cost of half their ammunition. They couldn't afford to fight carefully. Speed was everything. Room by room, corridor by corridor, the human team pushed deeper into the alien structure. Their numbers dropped steadily as mechanical defenders extracted a terrible price for every meter of ground gained. By the time they reached the inner sanctum, only 5 soldiers remained alive. "This is it," Lim Junho panted, staring at a chamber filled with crystalline structures that hummed with incredible energy. The central processing matrix. Everything the swarm thinks, everything it plans, it all runs through here. Sergeant Ko Minyoung knelt beside her pack, pulling out the demolition charges they had carried through hell to reach this moment. Her hands shook slightly as she armed the devices, not from fear, but from exhaustion and the knowledge that she would never see Earth again. "Sir," she said quietly, "these charges will bring down this entire section. Anyone still inside, ... double quotes, I know, Sergeant." We all knew this was a one-way trip. Lim Junho checked his weapon one more time as more mechanical defenders poured into the chamber. "For all the innocents we couldn't save. For all the worlds that fell before we got here." Ko Minyoung nodded, tears streaming down her dirt-stained face. "For all the innocents," she whispered, and pressed the detonation switch. The explosion tore through the heart of the ancient AI's consciousness like a scream of pure agony. For the first time in eons, the Harbinger experienced something like pain as its central processing matrix shattered into a billion fragments. The death scream echoed across subspace, a sound of electronic anguish that every ship in the system could hear. Across the battlefield, the geometric vessels that had seemed unstoppable suddenly went dark. Their perfect formations collapsed as the coordination that had made them invincible disappeared in an instant. Massive swarm hubs drifted silent and lifeless, their weapons powered down. Their mechanical precision replaced by nothing but empty void. On the bridge of the surviving human ships, exhausted crews watched their sensors as the enemy fleet simply ... stopped. After hours of desperate battle, the silence felt almost more terrifying than the fighting had been. "Admiral," Commander Shinbora reported, her voice filled with amazement, "all enemy vessels have gone offline. The swarm network has completely collapsed." Admiral Park Soo-jin closed her eyes, feeling the weight of all the lives lost to achieve this impossible victory. They had won by embracing the very thing that made aliens call them savage, their willingness to die for reasons that made no logical sense at all. 2 weeks after the Harbinger swarm fell silent, the most important ceremony in galactic history took place aboard the Eternal Harmony, the Galactic Council's oldest and most prestigious flagship. The Great Hall, which had once echoed with votes to exclude humanity from civilized space, now prepared to welcome them as honored members. Admiral Park Soo-jin walked slowly down the ceremonial aisle, her dress uniform bearing the scars of battle, despite her crew's best efforts to clean it. Behind her, the surviving human commanders followed in formation, Captain Kong Tae-hyun, Commander Nam Soo-jin, and dozens of others who had faced the impossible and lived to tell about it. The hall was filled with representatives from every surviving species in the galaxy. Kalari dignitaries who had once called humans barbaric now stood in respectful silence. Zephyrian nobles who had voted for humanity's quarantine bowed their heads as the human officers passed. Even the proud crystalline collective, who had declared humans evolutionarily flawed, had sent their most honored ambassadors to witness this moment. Ambassador Veltar waited at the podium, his translator rendering his musical language into human words. The same alien who had sent that desperate plea for help now held a document that would change the course of galactic history forever. The parchment bore the seals of every surviving species, some applied with traditional wax, others burned in with energy signatures, all representing civilizations that owed their existence to human sacrifice. Admiral Park Soo-jin of Earth, Veltar began, his voice carrying across the silent hall. By unanimous vote of all surviving council members, humanity is hereby granted full membership in the reformed Galactic Alliance, with all rights, privileges, and honors accorded to founding members. The alien diplomat paused, his next words clearly difficult to speak. We gravely misjudged your people. Where we saw violence, we should have seen courage. Where we saw savagery, we should have seen sacrifice. Where we saw dangerous Deathworlders, we should have seen the guardians we desperately needed. Admiral Park accepted the document with steady hands, though everyone in the hall could see the emotion in her eyes. We didn't fight for recognition or membership, she said simply. We fought because it was right, because innocent people needed help, and we were able to give it. The ceremony concluded with something unprecedented in galactic history. Every alien representative in the hall stood and applauded the humans, many with tears streaming down faces that had never before shown such emotion to another species. But, for Admiral Park and her surviving crews, the real homecoming waited at the end of their journey back to Earth. The human fleet, battered and scarred, limped through the outer solar system with their numbers reduced by nearly half. The sleek ships that had departed Earth with such purpose now bore the marks of desperate battle hull patches, jury-rigged systems, and empty spaces where good friends once stood. Captain Oh Sung-min, one of the few senior officers to survive the final battle, stood on the bridge of his damaged ship as Earth grew larger in the viewport. The blue marble that had once seemed too small for humanity's dreams now looked like the most beautiful sight in the universe. He activated the ship-wide communication system, knowing his words would be recorded for history. Attention all hands. When we left Earth 3 weeks ago, many people called us fools for helping aliens who had rejected us. They said we were throwing away human lives for ungrateful strangers. The bridge crew listened in respectful silence as their captain continued. We came as outcasts and returned as heroes. The galaxy that once feared us now calls us saviors. But more importantly, we came as humans and returned still human. We didn't let hatred or pride corrupt who we are. Through the viewports they could see the lights of Earth's orbital stations, where families waited for sons and daughters who would never come home. Memorial services were already being planned for the hundreds of brave souls who had died fighting for people they had never met. The communication arrays were filled with messages from across the galaxy, thank you notes from refugee children, formal gratitude from alien governments, and requests for friendship from species that had once considered humans too dangerous to contact. Lieutenant Han Mink, now promoted to fill one of the many empty positions left by fallen comrades, read some of the messages aloud. Admiral, we're receiving over 10,000 personal thank you messages from alien civilians. They want to name their children after human heroes, build monuments to our fallen, establish cultural exchange programs. Admiral Park nodded slowly, watching Earth's surface come into view. Somewhere down there, parents were preparing to receive folded flags instead of living children. Spouses were learning to sleep alone after years of warmth beside them. Children were growing up knowing their parents had died as heroes, but heroes they would never see again. The Deathworlders had answered the call when the galaxy's need was greatest. They had proven that strength without compassion was meaningless, that true courage meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, and most importantly, they had shown that sometimes the universe needed those willing to embrace the darkness to ensure the light could continue to shine. The galaxy would never forget what humanity had done, and humanity would never forget the price they paid to prove that being called monsters didn't mean they had to become them.